Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are blessed today to be joined by Dustin Aubert, who is a director with PGC Basketball. He is also a skill acquisition coach working with NBA pre-draft candidates. Coach, thanks for being here today.
Appreciate you having me, Coach.
So, given your unique background in regards to what your day-to-day is these days, we're going to need a primer on how you got to where you are. And specifically, if you could take us through the journey of you getting involved with coaching to begin with, what was your first traditional coaching job and how we have now evolved into this cornucopia of opportunity and hatwear that you wear in the different, roles you play?
Yeah, great question. I mean, introduction to coaching was coaching like a 15-year-old AAU team when I was playing collegiately. I just fell in love with the way they had passion for the game. And in all honesty, we were the B team, and just like unbelievable camaraderie. Kids wanted to be there for the right reason. And just seeing the skill acquisition, being applied and these kids loving the game of basketball was fun, man. There was a mentor of mine who says, we coach the way we've been coached and we coach the way we've been parented. And I think seeing, being someone who's the son of a coach, I love speaking to who somebody can be, casting a vision for somebody else, and then seeing them get there along the way. And I think working with these 15-year-old kids when I was like 22 changed everything for me. The second part of that, there's a famous author named James Clear. He said, in any walk of life, you start with who you want to be, shift to have some act, and shrink to control what you can control. And I think even working with younger kids, I saw that at the end of this, wanted to do this for the rest of my life. I started with the end in mind. And then from that, I didn't know anything about coaching. So
can I interrupt for a second, Coach? Yeah. Can you repeat that? Because it wigged out while you were saying it. I got James Clear. So say James Clear and the quote again, and then roll back in.
Start with who you want to be, shift to how that person would act, shrink to control what you can control. Start, shift, shrink. And I realized, and this was years prior to even getting into reading, I had the end in mind that I wanted to be a coach that poured into players. And then I realized, I really need to dig into coaches who do this really well, meaning I created a portfolio where I had so many interviews of Pete Carroll and Steve Kerr and other guys that I loved, and just started to steal like an artist. And that's kind of where it all started, was coaching younger kids and then just really want to get into this thing. So,
and from there, take us through the proverbial resume, let's say, so we can ground the audience, because you coached collegiately for a little bit. You've done some other things, but let us know what that is.
Yeah, so after I played collegiately in Mississippi. I was an assistant. I was a graduate assistant at Long Beach State for a couple of years. My specialty was skill acquisition in games. Did a lot of analytical statting, where there's paint touches, multi-sided possessions, and that kind of stuff. And then did a lot of player development stuff with the Long Beach staff. Then was head coach of a junior college up in Northern California called Solano College. Hawkins.
You keep cutting out. Hold on. Hold on. You keep cutting out. Super weird. How's your signal?
Should be good over here.
Okay. All right. So Solano College, bring us back to Solano.
Yeah, for sure. So got to Solano. I was 22, was the associate head coach for a year. And then my life mentor, his name's John Nagel, kind of ushered me in to be the head coach, and was the head coach there for 3 years. I had a couple of guys on the roster older than me, and that was tough. It was, someone who played junior college basketball and operated in that space, but hadn't coached at that level. So it was different for sure. And then now this is my first year being full-time with PGC. I've worked 10 years with them as a director. Now I work on our director development side, our PGC coaching side, and then I also help out a buddy of mine with the NBA pre-draft process with an organization called Tandem. So
let's dive into that Solano piece right now. So you're there, super young. You're associate head coach for a year, and then you become the head coach. What did you realize right away that you still needed to figure out?
There are a good amount of things for sure. I think your question was the biggest thing to figure out. Was that your question?
What
Yeah.
was it that you figured out right away that you needed to figure out? Because you had great mentors, you played, you had already coached, you'd been the associate, now you're the head coach, and you've moved over 18 inches. All of a sudden, the world changes. So what is it that you were like, oh, Lord, here we go?
There's two big, the one is like that everyone says, the difference between suggestions and decisions, like it became, and he did such a great job of like, he puts life in perspective so well. So he was there overseeing everything as the associate, quote unquote, but he let me go through the fire really well. But the two things immediately that I learned was, one, how I was articulating things at practice was much different than who I was in games, and it immediately eroded trust. And what I mean by that is I'm very positive by nature. Like, I criticize to uplift, not to destroy. It's just how I've been wired. It's how I've been coached. But the moment I had to wear the hat of like, this is in-game adjustments, my dialogue was different to how I talk to players. And they immediately felt like, oh, this isn't the same guy that, you know, guides me every day. His dialogue is different. His demeanor is different. And so that's what here's the thing that helped immediately. It's called the coach's clap. And I found it through a podcast, but I also got it through Pete Carroll. And the coach's clap is when you applaud something independent of the outcome. And it shows your players that you're about the process. And it's something that coaches say and put on t-shirts and put on, you know, their placards in their locker room. But I'd found that I was about the process in practices, but I wasn't in games at all. And it was really hard for a while. And so there's this book that I love. I thoroughly enjoy reading. All of my mentors, I realized, read a lot. And one of my mentors had said, those who don't read are no better than those who can't read. And so it hit me pretty hard. It was like, I was a kid who, you know, kind of read, and then I really developed a voracious appetite for it. But one of the books I love is called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And in this book, there's what's called the magical feedback, which goes hand in hand with the coach's clap. The magical feedback is 19 words that you give to any hard-headed player or any non-culture player. And the 19 words, and we give this to all of our PGC staff as well, it's, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them. And there's simplicity in that complexity. The simplicity is that verbiage does three things. It lets them know, one, you're a part of this group. Like, this group is different. And that's why players decide in college to go to certain cultures, because they want something different. Number two is, we have really high standards here. You know, the famous adages of no one has ever risen to low expectations. They're gonna not enjoy it at the beginning, but they're gonna love you when they leave. And then the third part of it is, like, we don't mess around with our standards. We believe you can reach them. And so that sense of inclusion did a lot for me. So like, our guys knew what the magical feedback was. They'd heard about it before, but I'd use it verbatim and guys would love it. You know, they'd buy in immediately. And so that bled into the coaching clap, which is, I had 4. My coach's claps were, 1, if we had 1 more passes. We called them good to greats. So if we turned down good shots for great shots, whether the ball went in or not, I was going crazy. And, you know, by happenstance, our team would as well. Number 2 were deep paint touches. So paint touches in what we call the first box. And we have to do them on balance. Because in any offense, if rim pressure is king, corner threes at volume are queen. And so we want to get 2 feet in that deep first paint touch so we can get a spray corner 3. So if we got in there on balance, I'm going crazy. On defense, my 2 were 1, charge attempts. We were not great at taking charges. We were great at attempting charges. So it gave guys the space to be vulnerable and try them. And then the second one was if we gave up mid-range jumpers. Because that's how our offense was created, or I mean, our defense was created. We played the Texas Tech no middle. And usually, you know, if you miss short at the college level, it's transition going the other way. So even if they hit the first pull-up midi, like, our whole team is clapping and the other team is like, why would you applaud a make? Because we knew, as you know, maybe we get to the second half or the under 8 media, they're going to get a little more fatigued. And those shots statistically bode well for us. So those are ours. And that helped a lot.
Those are great. And there wasn't a lot of verbal feedback there because I was writing furiously to keep up. I'm curious what the trigger moment was for you to realize that disconnect in your authenticity.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I feel that it was, I put a lot of external pressure on myself for no reason. I felt if we didn't win games, I immediately tied that to my identity. And I'm sure my wife would retweet that. But like you think about a junior college level, there isn't a ton of pressure. Your livelihood isn't on the line to win and lose games. I was lucky enough at the college where I was, it was about long-term athletic development and scholastic development. It wasn't about getting players to win conference championships. But for some reason, being younger, I think I felt I had to prove that I belonged in a sense, you know?
1000%. And while that makes perfect sense, what was the moment when you realized that disconnection where your practice self didn't align with your game self? Did Coach Wilson or somebody pull you aside and be like, yo, man, what are you doing?
So it's Coach Nagel, who again, like he's the greatest coach I've ever been around. And I've been lucky enough to be around some really good coaches. He gets it, right? And so his phrase was always, is JUCO, baby, which means like, relax. It is what it is. Like we lost the game. We were up 1 at home against Mendocino my second year, my first year being the quote unquote head coach. And one of our guys had been furious with another player all game, right? So he plays the 5 and the other 5-man and him have been John. And so we're up 1 at home. Guy misses the front end of a 1, or I'm sorry, we're at the line. We missed the front end of a 1-on-1. Their big man gets the rebound with 1.5 left and just goes to hurl it, the length of the court. And so my player realizes like, this is a good opportunity after the horn sounds to give him a little push. Ref calls a foul, double bonus, they make 2, we lose, and I'm furious going back to the locker room. And he pulls me aside and he just puts life in perspective really well. And here's what his phrase that he would give me a lot. His phrase was, how is your reaction to this going to help their long-term development? And more than anything in the world, it's all about guiding them as young men. Like that period, end of sentence. Coach Nagel, if you look at his coaching tree, any good coach in the Sacramento Bay Area or many good coaches played for him. And what he did really well is he lit a fire in players to show them that they could do this as well. And I think that is a great legacy that he's created. He's shown young men like myself that intrinsically motivating people is better than externally yelling at them, And so at the core of so many things, his message is this will serve you when the ball stops bouncing, when you're a husband or a father. Like if I have can I tell a little side tangent? I think you'd like this, Coach Klein. So he had one rule at Solano. His was no cussing. It's a lack of control, and it's something that goes in line with PGC. And one of mine was we pick up 10 pieces of trash a day. I got it from the book Legacy by James Kerr about the New Zealand All Blacks. One of the things is sweep the shed. So if you're one of the better players, you need to leave your environment better than you found it. And picking up trash is a type of discipline. And so we kind of had those rules together. And so I'd pick up 10 pieces a day. Some of my players would pick up 11 because they're competitive and they wanted to win, whatever. In the summer, our dean of the college had told this story where 2 players were walking to the library, and I was gone with PGC. I'm not there from June, July, August. And the employee didn't know, because they're wearing blue hoodie, blue sweats, the Solano colors. They didn't know if they were basketball players or baseball players, because those are the only male sports we have on campus. And they knew about our no cussing rule and our trash rule. And so this player had grabbed a water bottle and shot it into the trash can, and it rimmed out, and they just kept walking. And the dean said in that moment to herself, she said, oh, those aren't basketball players, because basketball players would have picked that up. And it killed me, because it turns out they were baseball players. But the comedian in me said, ma'am, by the way we shoot the ball, that probably was a basketball player. but I wouldn't have got that from Coach Nagel teaches the game of life so well. Like that is a life principle. So anyway, that's kind of when things changed.
I love that story, and it perfectly captures the essence of why do we coach? What are sports really for? And I often talk about it being a vehicle to teach leadership, followership, and how to be part of something bigger than yourself. And that story and the way in which Coach Nagel would respond, and this is gold. How is your reaction to this going to help their long-term development? Is such a good question that I don't know that we ask that often enough, right? Because I would even change the word reaction to response, right? Like 100%. How is your response to this? Because a reaction is not necessarily controlled where a response is chosen. So,
right.
How would you say your work with PGC Basketball.
Yep.
Which, before you answer this, you need to give a little primer for people that don't know what we're talking about. But how would your work with that over the years and your growth as a leader in that space and the culture and values and sticky messages and all the stuff you're teaching there, how has that, it's not transformed, but how has that bled into the other areas of your work? Meaning, principles that you learned there that, let's just say they're not basketball related, right?
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that's classroom related has nothing to do with basketball. How does that show up in the other spaces where you work, where your fingerprint stays after you've gone, based on the way in which you create life lessons or whatever you said about Nagel coaching the game of life?
Yeah, great question. I think it's twofold. There are the surface level ones, which, like, if you've been to, like, so PGC stands for Point Guard College. It's a 5-day basketball immersion experience where we get players from high school and some in college and some younger, but I usually work with high school, college players, mostly high school, some college I get in the fold. But we teach esoteric knowledge that's hidden from the masses of how to be a good point guard, but also how to be a great leader. The big 3 things that I teach are, like, player development, confidence, and then leadership, right? Little things we do well from a teaching standpoint, we do what's called an echo, where, like, I say something as a coach, my players echo it back. So, like, if we're doing a drill, I teach the drill through a certain lens through PGC. We always teach, like, how to rotate through it first, some of our points of precision that need to be retained, and then a letter of shape. And shape is like our culture acronym. So little things like that, if you came to Solano, I would teach that way. And then after teaching, we do, I'd say, all right, this is called 2-on-1. And then I'd say 2-on-1, they'd echo clap twice. Little things like that are teaching styles that are different. But from a bigger holistic perspective, there's one thing we teach called unruffleability at my courses, called the Scoring College. Unruffleability is the ability to handle tough circumstances, people, situations that come your way with poise and control, right? We call it a lion mentality. My favorite line is, "That which angers you owns you." And I think this isn't a basketball skill, this is a life skill. So the ability to see controversy, take a breath, and then to respond to it as opposed to react to it is something that I've had ingrained with me through PGC for a decade now, and I think that's one thing that when people leave sessions at PGC, sometimes it wears off after a couple of months, but it's this confidence of when, I know when something happens in games, when a mistake occurs, I have this grace period and then I respond. Whereas most players, it goes mistake, reaction, compound mistake. The situation controls them because they don't have something in place to look at the event for what it is and then move on from it quicker. One of my favorite teaching lines is, anxiety is thought without control. Flow is control without thought. And so trying to get them into that flow state of, if something takes me out of my current mindset, I'm at the victim of that thing for the next 3 or 4 minutes, So that's helped me a ton, is like just the ability to move from one thing to the next without losing control.
So going back to sports, basketball as the vehicle here, how do you teach unruffleability?
Great question. That's perfect. I think there are a couple of ways. I think one, like getting players to realize it's a huge competitive advantage. There's a really good, what was the book? It's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he says, when we are unable to change our circumstance, we are forced to change ourselves, right? So one of the first things we do with our players is we draw 2 big circles. This was at Solano. The first one is the circle of uncontrol. The second one is the circle of control. So we talk about everything that angers us as basketball players. And if we don't have control over it, we put it in the not control circle. And it's simple, but again, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication of coaching. And so Coach Nagel used to say this, so I took it and ran with it. He said, guys, if arguing with referees got them to change their minds, we'd work on it for 40 minutes a day. We would have the best form. We'd find what they love to argue about the most. We would master it, Because it doesn't work, don't put attention into it. I think it was Pete Carroll who says the things we have control over, we need to master. The things we don't, we cannot put our energy into. And it's that simple, you know? So, getting them to realize, like, I don't have control over my teammate not catching the ball, right? I have no control over that. I do have control over dapping them up and moving on to the next play. We call it NBA. What's your next best action you can take as a human being? And a lot of times it's getting out of your own head and lifting up somebody else, if that makes sense. So.
Absolutely. And I'm going to drill down a little bit further.
Yep.
Give us some specifics
Cool.
of how you create those situations. Having been to a few of these things and watching,
for sure.
It's different at every session.
Yeah.
But for people who are listening and have no context, basketball is the vehicle. And it's like, look, this is what we would do in practice to create situations to force our athletes to have an unruffleable response.
There's two that I do at practices, and I'll use practices because not everybody goes to sessions, so it's different there. But like at sessions, sometimes we'll use a tennis ball. You got to play with a tennis ball for 2 minutes, figure it out. Life's not fair. Whatever. With my practice, I let them know. I got this from Jay Wright. I want to always thank the passer. He has his best players wear the dark colors, so they're the away team. The second team wears the light colors, and he'll let them know, hey, for these next 7 minutes, we're going to make some terrible road calls on you. Terrible. Your job is to have a great attitude and move on, and their word is attitude. They repeat it when things aren't going well. So it's like putting them and gamifying that is really fun. And now in game situations, you've prepped them for that situation. The other one I like to do, I just had it. What was it? Oh yeah, we call it the unfair game. And so like, I'm going to make wrong calls on purpose. It is what it is. You're going to travel, but you're not going to travel, but you'll be called for a travel. And then the final one I do, and I just got this from Mike Neighbors and I loved it. So he said when Kelsey Plum was at Washington, she would get really frustrated. So he got a stopwatch. So I call it the stopwatch rule. And so she'd get really mad and he'd click a stopwatch in her face. Like, that makes a noise like beep, 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 right? So she goes, what are you doing? And he goes, I need to know as your coach, when you mess up, how long it takes. So I know how long to take you out for. So if you get mad and it's 80 seconds, I know that. So I know to sub you for 80 seconds. And he said the rest of the day, just to make him mad, she'd mess up and she'd go, that's okay. We're good. And so it's just little things like that show your players, oh, he's put time into this. He cares about this.
That's so good.
Stopwatch one I just learned about in Chicago. I can't wait to use next year at sessions. Man.
That's so good. Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to use that tonight.
Right.
All right. So let's pivot on this just a touch. Let's say, and I don't know if you've done this, but let's say you all of a sudden are put in a position where you are no longer coaching basketball, you're coaching water polo, right? We're out here and our girls just won their NorCal semifinal. They play Saturday in the finals. How do you take these principles that you've developed over your life and how do you apply them specifically to another discipline in the way in which you've seen it done or the way in which you would do it regardless of sport?
Yeah, man, good question. I think, so there's a really good book that every coach should read called Range by David Epstein. And it's about how great coaches or people are good at a multitude of things. And he says, everyone needs habits of mind that allow them to dance across disciplines. And I think every great coach has habits of mind that allow them to dance across disciplines, meaning like Pete Carroll would be an amazing basketball coach because his energy is off the charts. Steve Kerr is a stoic, in my opinion. He's really good at maintaining good energy when things don't go well. He'd be amazing at coaching all sports. He may not have the technical knowledge, but he'd be really good at those things. So I think you have basically your values that you care about as a coach, and basketball is the vehicle that you teach those values through. And I think those values would be the same in any sport. And so I think it's all about, one, living your values loudly and creating opportunities where people can see the things that you talk about, but see you actually live them out, right? Again, Coach Nagel is a great example. Like on road games and stuff, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing this, but it's embarrassing for me. But he would there's really good Holiday Inn that we'd stay at when we go play in the Monterey tournament. And I noticed he would give money to some of the employees that would clean up breakfast after us. And I'm like, Coach, man, I saw you give that woman a 20. That's awesome. And he'd be like, no, I just found it I found it on the ground. It was hers. It wasn't mine. Knowing he's lying, right? So then I took over for some tournaments, and next year we were there again. And I was like, Coach, where in the budget is the extra money to give the employees at these Holiday Inn hotels? And he was like, there's no budget. Like I just did that. And so I got to see, like, man, this is just a guy who's about it. He's a really good leader of people. And so I think those cores that he has could work in any walk of life. And so, like, my cores through PGC are spirit, which is your energy; communication, the ability to have dialogue; hustle, which is just doing things quickly; A stands for approach, which is your mindset; P stands for precision, which is a ridiculous attention to detail; and then E stands for enhance, to make things better. So I think if you have that in any coaching world, you're going to be really successful. But it's all about having your pillars and having the behaviors that drive those pillars, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I want to pivot from there because you keep referencing Nagel, and it makes me curious about what you have taken, learned, adopted from the other mentors or coaches in your life that are front of mind for you, that show up on a regular basis, not just, oh, this one time when coach was doing this, it's something that, I kind of held on to and used, but it's like, no, these things show up on a day-to-day basis for me. And you're going to thank the pastor here one more time for like the things that they've poured into you.
Yeah, that's really good. There are a few different examples. Let me see if I can pull it up. Because the other thing I started doing was, like, coaches that even don't coach the game of basketball, like Pete Carroll, Pep Guardiola, they'd have these really good things that I would take. And in those situations where I take them, I'd never worked with these people before, and I'd steal these things from them. But I always want to thank the pastor. But first, like, Coach Munson was a really, really good teacher at Long Beach State. A couple of things he did was, one, he's always really good at putting things in perspective. But I think as a leader, he was really good. And I noticed him doing this, so I started to quantify it myself. And so I put them as leadership questions. So things I ask myself on a daily basis. And here's the one that Munson would do. Number one is, the question is, how have I recognized someone else's leadership today? And that's called impact. And so literally what he did at a lot of practices was he would take a moment and he'd recognize when somebody else led that day. And it seems like a little thing, but it now puts it at front of mind for the people that you lead. And I love that he did that. Number two was, what positive thing have I said about someone who wasn't in the room? And that's called recognition. And there's a couple of people I got this from, but Sefu Bernard was probably the first one I saw do this. He now coaches with the Washington Mystics. But I'd learned through listening to, like, leadership podcasts, that's called third-party leadership. It's telling someone else how great someone else who's not in the room is. And it teaches young men and women, when you're not in my space, I still have your back. And I think that's a really powerful thing, because culture, to its roots, are the conversations that are had when we're not in the room. And if we teach these young men and women, like, if we have someone's back when they're not in the room, we speak homage of them, like, they're more willing to trust us. And then the final one I had, and I got this from Mano Watsa. He's the owner of PGC. He's so good at what he does. But basically the question is, what have I done to make it more likely I will learn something today? And that's just continuous improvement. And I was on a Zoom earlier today with Mano, and he's always learning new things. And it's really inspiring when the head of PGC is consistently learning and growing and getting better. Everyone else has to do the same thing as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Yes. And since you just talked about that always learning piece, and obviously that's something that you've picked up and you've done since you got into this profession, I'm going to ask a question with a little spin on it, which is, what is something that, due to this always learning and enhancement mindset, that you've recently changed your mind on? Meaning, you used to be over here.
Yep.
And nope, now I'm over here, and here's why.
Yeah. Probably the latest one is more, and we were talking about this before the pod, letting my players play more, and letting them having self-discovery. But the new thing that I tried that I didn't really like was having them talk more to me, as opposed to me telling them everything. Example, who did I get this from? The famous coach in Canada. He's a really good teacher. I'll think of it. but he had said this on a podcast, so I thought I'd try it. So he calls it ABCD. And ABCD is just a methodology to get your players to communicate more. This may not have been his intention, but this is how I use it, and it works unbelievably well. I give it at coaching clinics as well. So ABCD is the A stands for, so I'll pose a question after a 5-minute game, right? We'll play a game, some sort of small-sided game, and I'll say, hey, on the blue team, Scotty was the best player by far. Go. So one player will say, I agree. He got a ton of paint touches. That's something that we care about. He got an incredible offensive rebound to give us the lead, and he hit the game-winning jumper. That's agree. B stands for build, which means someone might take Scotty's point and build it to something else. And so they'll say, I want to build on that. I think Scotty played well, but I think Armand set really good screens for Scotty. And on his rolls, that created tags so he could make better passes, right? The C stands for challenge, which just means disagree. And that one's really beneficial because we want discourse at practice. The way I've heard it said is we want confrontation without being disrespectful. And Rick Torbett and I got to do this cool little clinic for Susie Merchant. She's the head coach of Michigan State. And she was asking us ways to get her players to argue more at practice. She said they're too nice. Like they'll play pickup and the ball will go out of bounds and one player will go, it's off you. And the other one's like, yeah, okay. And she'll say, I'll be watching. Like, no, it was not off of her. You need to argue more. And so getting them to learn how to like conversate is a powerful tool. And then the D stands for go deeper, which means you take one point and you go to a deeper level with it. And so you'll hear me say a lot, like after a game or at PGC after a session, we'll teach a skill and we'll say, all right, let's ABCD that. And the terminology is really good. They'll start to identify, oh, I want to build off that. Or they'll go, no, I want to challenge that. So instead of just arguing, they now have kind of gutters to follow or lane lines to follow. And the conversation's way better. I didn't like to do that at all. I'd like to tell them what's going on, but they think differently than I do and better than I do at times. And as Doug Lamov says so beautifully, he says, I ask questions of you because the game asks questions of you. And if you're not ready to answer, you're not ready to play. And so doing this is a really good way to ask questions of them. So
if I hear you right, this framework is shared with them and you throw them a scenario and they can see it and they can talk about it, but you're not like, okay, what do you agree with? Okay, what do you build? What do you want to build on? What do you challenge? How do you implement something like that?
I think you get them in the classroom more often, meaning like a room where it isn't basketball related and you get them to talk life. And now they're more cognizant of how to talk to one another. Dick DeVenzio, the creator of PGC, he said, for coaches, there's nothing more valuable than an air-conditioned classroom. And I agree with that. I think getting the habit of learning how to talk to one another, like as humans, gets them to talk to each other on the floor. You can't have them communicate on the floor and then they don't talk off the floor. That's not how that works. And one of those two realms, you're lying, And so that's why when coaches will show videos or pictures on Twitters of like, we took everyone's phone and we put them in the middle and the first one to check it has to pay for dinner. I don't think that's the best way to do it. I think you create an environment where the conversations are good and they don't check their phones as much. So basically I'll have a scenario happen and I'll say, let's ABCD that. Sometimes it'll be just challenge. They'll just challenge and challenge and challenge, and that's fine. And then I'll unpack what I saw and then we'll move on. Other times the conversation is really good. Like it's like a timeout, a player-led team is better than a coach-led team. And if I can call a timeout and give my best player the clipboard for once every few games, that's a powerful thing to do if the other players are willing to listen. And they're willing to listen if they feel heard. They feel heard if they're able to communicate with each other. So.
Oh, absolutely. And following up on that, just for the listeners as well, it's like, okay, so if you're going to implement this, you're going to start in a classroom, you're going to give them a scenario that may or may not have anything to do with basketball, which is, whatever, Chick-fil-A is better than Kentucky Fried Chicken. And here's your framework, discuss. And they have to start with one of those words.
Yeah, kind of. So actually that flows beautifully. This is probably my favorite thing I give out at sessions to our observing coaches. I call it the week of culture. And basically I just took really good things from great coaches because I was a young coach and it took like 8 years and it's getting there. So I won't do the whole thing, but these are a couple of the good ones. And this is how they learn to talk to each other. From Dabo Sweeney, the head coach of Clemson, he has what's called the fishing chair. Fishing is a lot like golf. When you're done, you go to the clubhouse and you share stories. And he said this was the biggest difference between them winning the Natty against Alabama and them losing to Alabama. He said he started doing this, and it felt like the players to know each other more. Fishing chair is one person sits in front of them, everyone in the room gets to ask them one question. And so we do that in what's called our Teach It Tuesdays. And so I would go first. I'd have my players sit up front. And the first question I ask is, what is something you know now you wish you knew when you were 11 years old? And then everyone in the room gets to ask a question. And it's cool. Like you get to see, like some players ask, what's your best first date ever? Worst first date ever? Favorite movie? Who do you play like and why? You know, all these cool questions come up. And a buddy of mine who's a two-time coach of the year in the state of Arkansas would do this with his girls team. And it got so powerful that they had him sit in the chair and they got to ask him some really cool questions. And so that was the first way. The second part of Teach It Tuesday, this is from Brett Brown when he was the head coach of the Sixers. Basically, everyone on the team gets to teach something to everyone else on the team. And we do this in the classroom. I go first and I teach a little ASL because I like sign language. And so I teach them a couple things they can sign to one another. Reason why is like in harsh, like loud environments, which we don't really get at the junior college level, they can like sign a play call to each other. One of my players would come up, he's a big man, and he taught us how to do tap dancing. And as coaches, we're like, how does he have that footwork, but he can't pivot and make a layup, right? And then the next day, one of our players brought a snake into the room, and snakes aren't legal over a certain size in the state of California. So as he brought the snake in, my big man named Amadou from Africa got up and sprinted out of the room. And all of our coaches were like, that is the fastest Amadou's ever sprinted in his life. And now our transition defense is called Python. And so like, that's what culture is. It's little inside jokes that are created through these moments. And so now they learn like, almost like Ted Lasso, they learn that the uncool is cool, you know? And so those are a couple of them. And so we do 5 days of things like that. Another one is Wisdom Wednesday, where they bring in their favorite quote or song lyric or scripture, anything, and we just share it. And then this is the, can I give one more, Coach?
Keep going.
Yeah, I got you. So I made this one up, so I was really proud of it. And I shared it on a coach's call. And one of the Florida State assistants, Bill Ferreira, is that his name? He really liked it, so he took it. So it's called Make Someone's Day. At the JUCO level, it's hard because everyone wants to get their own and get out. Like it is what it is. And so our big thing was like, hey guys, if we all win, we all win. You know, if one or two of you win, you average 18, but we only have 3 wins as a team, you're not going to get looks. So I implemented this thing where every one of them puts their name in a bowl. And before practice, they pick a name out of the bowl, and whatever name they pull, that's their person that day. It's their job to make sure that person has the best practice they've ever had. They lose themselves in the service of another, right? After the practice is over, I have no idea who they have, but my assistants will know. After the practice is over, we film the practice and I watch it as they go to class. As they go to class, I write down who I think they've had that day just by how they act and move and speak. And if they come back and I'm right, they get a point. If they come back and I'm wrong, they do some cardio. But no one's ever been wrong before, which is great. And so we do these, and they're not allowed to pick out their own name. But it's so funny during the season, they'll be like, Coach, we got to do that bowl thing again. Those practices are always amazing. They don't miss. And I'm like, you can do it. It's called being a good person. You don't need a name. You can just pick anyone yourself and let it ride.
What was the name of that?
That one's been really fun. It's called Make Someone's Day.
Make Someone's Day. All right, I love that.
You just pick it out of a bowl, and like it's so funny when we put parameters on things, they're more likely to do them.
That's so awesome, and it's so simple. I mean,
as a coach, I call it a ball fake. It's just a ball fake.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. All right. God, man, we could do this for hours, and I want to wrap up, and it's like, I don't know that we can get to a better spot after that, but I will offer this. What is something that you know now that you wish you knew at 11?
That's really good. Something I currently know now that I wish I knew at 11.
That's your question, right?
Yes, it is. Mine is the power of vulnerability. That is my big thing with our guys, because we get guys that are so cool. Like, man, they're so cool. But the two culture killers are too coolness and too shyness. Yeah. And so like, I let them see a version of me that not everybody sees. I love Harry Potter. I love Marvel movies. So I nerd out in front of them in a funny way, right? Like some practices, I'll put them in a house. There's 4 Harry Potter houses. And so we'll do a tournament. But like they get to see me be me, And I think like the best coaches I've been around, they're so vulnerable. They show a side of themselves. And a lot of men, like hegemonic masculinity teaches us, being vulnerable is bad, which that's not how you will not find a championship team that has not been vulnerable with one another. So I wish I'd known that when I was a player, because I think I could have led people better. I cared so much externally about what people thought of me. And so I'll leave you with this. This is a quote by a guy named Jay Shetty. He's a monk. He's brilliant. But he says this about confidence, and it's really confusing. So I'll try and explain it because I didn't get it for like a month. He says, as people, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am, which means like, I'm not who Dustin thinks he is. I'm not who Coach Climo thinks I am. I am who I think Coach Climo thinks I am. And so young men live this way a lot. They look at someone else and they think, I wonder what he thinks of me. And that's how they operate and live. But it's like, you can't read that person's thoughts. So why put energy into that thing? You know what I'm saying? It's all about you starting with who you want to be, shifting to be that person and shrinking to control what you can control. You let those little things get to you, they're going to destroy your confidence. And I think vulnerability is a really good way to build confidence. Yeah, if I'd known that at 11, game changer.
Yeah. Mic drop right there. So we're going to stop, but I'm going to give you an opportunity because I'm sure there are other people that want more of that. So besides going to see you as a director at PGC Basketball, where can people tap into more of Coach Aubert's wisdom?
My Facebook, I'm just kidding. My MySpace is no. I mean, honestly, Twitter is where I drop a lot of basketball content. I put sets and trends and actions. And it's just at Dustin Aubert, all one word. My email is dustin@pgcbasketball.com. I love talking hoop and talking life. So if anyone wants to send a message, feel free. But no, I appreciate you having me on, man. I don't get to do as many of these as I want to, just with all the travel. So this is always a blast. And this, I think the world of you, man. I really appreciate you. Specifically like Brett Couchy, Tony Vazaturo, a lot of people speak your praise, and I see why, man. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate having you on, and can't wait to get in the lab here to start using some of these tonight. And it's like, how do I categorize what's the low hangingest fruit, so to speak, so I don't overwhelm my guys and they're like, where'd you just come from? So thank you for being on, and I look forward to seeing you when you're back here in God's country.
Yes, sir. I'll be there soon, man. I'll come find you.